An 8-year-old girl visits an abandoned cat every day. When the landowner decides to expel it, she does something that leaves everyone speechless. Sophia's world was a small, magical one. At 8 years old, every corner of her neighborhood felt like an adventure waiting to unfold. One sunny afternoon, while skipping along the sidewalk with her stuffed bunny, she stumbled upon a forgotten plot of land sandwiched between two gray, tired-looking buildings. It was overgrown with weeds, littered with discarded objects, and eerily quiet. But as Sophia peered closer, something moved. A pair of green eyes, sharp as emeralds, blinked at her from the shadows. A scruffy orange cat emerged, his fur matted and his tail crooked, as if life had not been kind to him. Sophia froze, clutching her bunny tightly. The cat stared back, curious but cautious. Slowly, she knelt and extended her hand. "Hi, kitty," she whispered, her voice as soft as the breeze. The cat didn't approach, but it didn't run either. Sophia smiled. This was a start. From that day on, Sophia made it her mission to visit the cat. She named him Marmalade because of his orange fur, though it was far from smooth or shiny. Each morning, she'd sneak scraps of food from her breakfast and carefully pack them into her little pink backpack. Marmalade was wary at first, watching from a distance as Sophia placed the food on an old tin plate. But soon, hunger overcame fear, and he began to eat while Sophia sat nearby, chatting about her day as though he were a dear friend. Over time, Marmalade grew more comfortable. He began to greet Sophia with a low, rumbling purr, even allowing her to stroke his ragged fur. To Sophia, Marmalade wasn't just a cat, he was her confidant, her adventure buddy, and the hero of the grand stories she made up as they sat together. But Sophia wasn't the only one who noticed Marmalade. Some neighbors had begun to grumble about the stray cat. "It's unsanitary," one man muttered as he passed by. "That animal is going to attract more pests." Others, however, watched Sophia's devotion with quiet admiration. An elderly woman who lived across the street often smiled as Sophia skipped toward the lot each day, her backpack bouncing behind her. "She has a kind heart," the woman would say to herself. Sophia was oblivious to the mixed opinions. To her, Marmalade was family. Then, one fateful evening, she overheard her parents talking in hushed tones. "Did you hear? Mr. Becker, the man who owns that lot, he's planning to clear it out," her mother said. "What about the cat?" her father asked. "He doesn't care. Says it's just a nuisance. He's going to call animal control." Sophia's heart sank. She didn't fully understand what animal control meant, but she knew it wasn't good. That night, she lay awake in her bed, clutching her bunny and staring at the ceiling. She couldn't let this happen. Marmalade needed her. The seed of a plan began to take root in her mind. The morning after hearing the unsettling news, Sophia didn't waste a second. She dashed out of the house, clutching a piece of leftover toast in one hand and her backpack in the other. Her tiny legs carried her to the lot as fast as they could, her mind racing with worry. What had happened to Marmalade if Mr. Becker followed through on his plan? When she arrived, Marmalade was waiting near the corner of the lot, his tail flicking lazily in the sunlight. Sophia dropped to her knees, carefully setting the toast on the tin plate. "You're not going anywhere," she murmured. "I promise." As Marmalade ate, Sophia began to whisper her plans. "Maybe I can hide you in my room," she said, her eyes wide with determination. "Mom and Dad won't notice. You can sleep in my toy box. Or maybe I'll take you to Grandma's farm. You'd like it there. Lots of space to run." Marmalade, of course, offered no response, but his purring, as he rubbed against her leg, felt like an agreement. Sophia's visits became more frequent. Every free moment she was there, feeding Marmalade, brushing the dirt from his fur with an old comb she'd found, and playing little games with a string she'd tied to a stick. Marmalade, once a wary stray, now followed her like a loyal companion, his green eyes brightening every time he saw her. But tension was growing in the neighborhood. Mr. Becker had started visiting the lot, measuring its boundaries and grumbling about how it was an eyesore. He didn't seem to notice Sophia at first, but that changed one afternoon when he spotted her sitting cross-legged in the grass, Marmalade curled up on her lap. "Hey, kid," he barked, startling Sophia. She jumped, clutching Marmalade protectively. "This isn't a playground," Mr. Becker continued, his face red with irritation. "And that cat? It's not your pet. Get out of here and take it with you." Sophia's heart pounded. She wanted to say something brave, something that would make Mr. Becker change his mind. But all she could do was nod silently and gather Marmalade in her arms. Tears burned her eyes as she walked away, feeling Mr. Becker's stern gaze on her back. That night, Sophia sat at the dinner table, pushing peas around her plate with a fork. Her parents noticed her unusual quietness. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" her mom asked gently. Sophia hesitated. She wanted to tell them everything, to beg for their help. But a part of her knew they wouldn't understand. Adults never did. Instead, she shook her head. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a small smile. But Sophia wasn't fine. The next morning, when she returned to the lot, Mr. Becker had put up a crude sign: "No trespassing." It stood like a menacing barrier between her and Marmalade's home. For the first time, Marmalade seemed nervous. He stayed close to Sophia, his ears twitching at every sound. Sophia could feel the clock ticking. She had to act before it was too late. That evening, as she sat on her bed staring at her favorite markers and a stack of paper, an idea struck her. It was bold. It was risky. But it might just work. Sophia picked up a marker and began to draw. Sophia spent the entire night working on her project. The markers in her tiny hands danced across sheets of paper as she poured every ounce of her imagination into what she believed could save Marmalade. By the time the sun began to rise, her room was a colorful mess of scribbled notes, hand-drawn posters, and a large piece of cardboard with bold letters that read, "Help Marmalade, he need a home." The centerpiece of her plan was a story, a simple yet heartfelt tale of how Marmalade had been abandoned, how he lived alone in the lot, and how he had become her best friend. Sophia believed that if people knew Marmalade like she did, they wouldn't let him be taken away. That morning, Sophia's parents noticed her unusual energy. She scarfed down her breakfast, hugged her mom tightly, and ran out the door before anyone could ask what she was up to. Her backpack was heavier than usual, filled with her carefully crafted signs and a roll of tape she'd borrowed from her dad's desk. The town square was bustling with activity when she arrived. It was market day, and the plaza was alive with colorful stalls, the chatter of neighbors, and the aroma of fresh bread. Perfect, Sophia thought. With a determination far beyond her years, Sophia set up her station in a corner of the plaza. She propped up her largest sign against a bench and began taping smaller posters to lampposts and walls. Passers-by stopped to read the signs, their faces softening as they took in the childlike drawings of Marmalade with his crooked tail and big green eyes. Sophia stood by her sign, clutching a marker in case anyone had questions. She wasn't sure what would happen, but she felt brave. And then the questions came. "Is this the orange cat from the old lot?" asked a middle-aged woman holding a bag of vegetables. "Yes," Sophia said, nodding eagerly. "He's really nice. I've been feeding him, but Mr. Becker wants him gone. He doesn't have anywhere else to go." The woman frowned, glancing back at the sign. "Poor thing. That lot's been empty for years. Why does he care now?" A small crowd began to form. Some people murmured sympathetically, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Sophia's voice grew louder as she told Marmalade's story over and over, her earnestness tugging at the hearts of many. As more people gathered, Sophia spotted Mr. Becker himself entering the plaza. Her heart skipped a beat. His eyes landed on the commotion, and his expression darkened as he realized what was happening. "What is all this?" he demanded, pushing his way through the small crowd. He looked down at Sophia, who stood her ground despite the lump forming in her throat. "It's for Marmalade," she said, lifting her chin. "He doesn't have a home, and he's my friend. You can't just make him leave." Mr. Becker scowled, his gaze darting to the posters around the plaza. "This cat is a nuisance. It's not safe to have strays running around. And you can't just make a spectacle like this without permission." Before Sophia could reply, a voice from the crowd spoke up. "What harm is the cat doing?" It was the elderly woman from across the street. Her voice was firm, her arms crossed. "You let that lot rot for years, and now you're worried about one little cat?" The murmurs grew louder. Others began to voice their agreement. Sophia looked around, her heart swelling as she realized people were starting to take her side. Mr. Becker's face reddened. "This is my property," he snapped. "I have every right to do what I want with it." But Sophia wasn't giving up. With trembling hands, she held up her biggest poster. "Marmalade doesn't have a voice," she said, her words clear and strong. "But I do. And I'm saying he deserves a chance." The crowd erupted into applause. Even those who had initially been skeptical found themselves moved by the little girl's courage. Sophia's stand had sparked something, a sense of community and compassion that had long been missing. As Mr. Becker stood speechless, Sophia realized she wasn't alone anymore. The applause still echoed in Sophia's ears as she stood in the middle of the crowd, her poster held high. She felt a surge of confidence, like she and Marmalade had a real chance now. Marmalade himself had timidly followed her to the plaza, sticking close to her side as though he sensed that this day was different. But Mr. Becker wasn't ready to back down. "Fine," he said, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. "You all want to play hero for Stray Cat? Let's see, how many of you are willing to actually do something about it?" He pointed at Sophia. "This isn't about just letting a cat stay. It's about responsibility. Who's going to clean up after it? Feed it? Pay for its vet bills if it gets sick?" The crowd fell silent. Mr. Becker smirked, confident that he had regained control. Sophia's small shoulders slumped, and she looked down at Marmalade. What if he was right? She was just a kid. What more could she do? Then, from the edge of the crowd, a familiar voice rang out. "She's already been doing all that." It was the elderly woman who had been watching Sophia's visits to the lot. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Mr. Becker. "This little girl has been feeding that cat every day without anyone asking her to. Maybe you could learn a thing or two from her." The murmurs started again, this time louder. A man in a work uniform nodded. "I see her there every morning," he said. "She's more responsible than most adults I know." Another woman chimed in. "If this cat has survived this long, maybe it's because it had someone looking out for it. You can't just throw it out now." Mr. Becker's expression soured as he realized the tide was turning against him. "This is still my property," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Sophia saw her chance. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "Marmalade doesn't need much," she said. "Just a safe place to stay. I can keep helping him, and maybe others can help too." The suggestion hung in the air, and then something remarkable happened. "I'll chip in for food," said the elderly woman. "I can build a little shelter for him," added the man in the uniform. "I have some old blankets he can use," someone else offered. The crowd began to buzz with ideas, and Sophia's eyes lit up. This wasn't just about saving Marmalade anymore. It was about coming together to do something kind, something good. Even Mr. Becker seemed taken aback by the sudden wave of support. He scratched his head, looking uncomfortable. "All right," he grumbled finally. "You can keep the cat there. But I'm not doing any work for it." The crowd cheered, and Sophia beamed. Marmalade, as if sensing the victory, rubbed against her leg and let out a contented purr. But as the crowd began to disperse, Sophia knew this wasn't the end. Saving Marmalade wasn't just about convincing people today. It was about proving they could make this work. As she walked home that evening, Marmalade trailing behind her, Sophia started planning her next steps. This was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like they had a chance. For a few days, it seemed like everything was perfect. The neighbors delivered on their promises. Blankets, bowls, and even a small handmade shelter appeared in the lot for Marmalade. Sophia visited him every day after school, bringing treats and proudly showing him the little oasis the community had created. Marmalade seemed happier than ever. He stretched out in the sun, explored his new shelter, and even began to greet the neighbors who stopped by to say hello. Sophia's heart swelled with pride every time she saw him, knowing she'd made a difference. But good times rarely last without a challenge. One evening, Sophia's parents called her into the living room. Their faces were serious, and Sophia's stomach twisted with worry. "Honey," her mom began gently, "we need to talk about Marmalade." Sophia's heart sank. "What about him?" Her dad sighed. "We got a notice today. From Mr. Becker." He held up a piece of paper, and though Sophia couldn't read all the words, she saw the bold letters at the top. "Notice of violation." "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means he's changed his mind," her mom said, her voice heavy. "Mr. Becker says the shelter and feeding area violates city codes. He wants everything removed from the lot by the end of the week." Sophia's chest tightened. But Marmalade needs those things. He can't live there without them." Her dad rubbed his temples. "We know, sweetie, but he's within his rights. If we don't clear it out, he can report it, and the city will get involved." Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes. But everyone was helping. Why would he do this? Her parents exchanged a look. They didn't want to tell her that Mr. Becker had likely been embarrassed by the attention Sophia's actions had brought and was retaliating out of spite. "We'll figure something out," her mom said finally. "But for now, we have to follow the rules." Sophia stormed out of the room, her mind racing. Marmalade had finally been safe and happy, and now it was all being taken away. The next morning, Sophia visited the lot to find Marmalade curled up in his shelter, oblivious to the looming threat. She sat beside him, stroking his fur as her tears fell silently. "I promised I'd take care of you," she whispered. "But I don't know what to do." The neighbors began to hear about Mr. Becker's new demands. Some offered their sympathy, but others started to lose hope. "Maybe it's not worth the fight," one man said. "It's just one cat, after all." Sophia felt like the weight of the world was on her tiny shoulders. Even the people who had once rallied around Marmalade were starting to doubt. And with the deadline approaching, she knew time was running out. That evening, Sophia sat in her room, staring at her drawings of Marmalade. She thought about the first time she'd seen him, lonely, scrappy, and forgotten. The thought of him going back to that life filled her with a determination she couldn't ignore. "I'm not giving up," she whispered to herself. But what could she do? Sophia knew she couldn't fix this on her own. She would need a new plan, one even bigger than before. The deadline loomed closer, and Sophia's mind buzzed with ideas, most of them impossible. Hide Marmalade somewhere else? Too risky. Sneak into the lot at night and put the shelter back after it was taken down? Mr. Becker would notice. Convince her parents to adopt him? They'd already said no. Her frustration grew, but so did her resolve. Sophia refused to let Marmalade feel abandoned again. Then inspiration struck. While flipping through a picture book in her room, Sophia came across an illustration of a town fair. The colorful banners, lively crowds, and smiling faces reminded her of how she'd rallied the community before. Maybe she could do it again, but bigger this time. This wouldn't just be about Marmalade. It would be about all the animals like him. The next morning, Sophia hurried to the lot. Marmalade greeted her with a happy meow, but she didn't have time for their usual routine. She scribbled down notes in her notebook, her head spinning with possibilities. By the time she returned home, the plan was fully formed. Sophia would host a Save Marmalade event. She'd invite everyone in the neighborhood, including Mr. Becker, and show them why Marmalade and all stray animals deserve compassion. She wasted no time. With her parents' reluctant help, Sophia made flyers on the family computer, printing as many as she could. She handed them out at school, taped them to lampposts, and left them in mailboxes. Each flyer had the same message. "Join us this Saturday to help save Marmalade and support stray animals. Let's make our neighborhood a better place for everyone." As the day approached, Sophia worked tirelessly. She convinced her parents to let her set up tables in their backyard, where she and some friends painted signs, made crafts, and baked cookies to sell at the event. Her dad helped her set up a small stage, and her mom reached out to a local animal rescue organization who agreed to bring information about adopting and fostering stray animals. Word spread quickly. Sophia's passion was infectious, and soon the neighbors who had felt helpless before began to pitch in again. One family offered to bring drinks, another donated decorations. Even the skeptical man from earlier showed up with a bag of cat food, muttering, "Figured this might help." Sophia felt hopeful for the first time in days. But she still had one big concern: Mr. Becker. Would he come? Would he even care? On Saturday morning, the backyard was buzzing with activity. Sophia had never seen so many people gathered in one place before. Tables were lined with snacks, crafts, and donation jars. The animal rescue organization had set up a booth with pictures of adoptable pets, and kids ran around with balloons tied to their wrists. Sophia stood on the small stage, clutching her microphone. She spotted Mr. Becker lingering at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Her heart pounded, but she took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice wavering at first but growing stronger. "I wanted to tell you about Marmalade, but also about all the animals out there who don't have homes or people to love them." She told Marmalade's story again, from the first day she found him to the moment she realized he might be taken away. She talked about how much he meant to her, how he inspired her to believe in kindness and community. By the time she finished, the crowd was silent. Even Mr. Becker had softened, his arms uncrossing as he listened. The event raised enough money to officially sponsor Marmalade's care through the rescue organization, ensuring he would always have food, medical attention, and a safe place to stay. But more importantly, it brought the community together in a way Sophia had never imagined. As the day wound down, Sophia spotted Mr. Becker walking toward her. She braced herself for his usual gruffness, but instead, he surprised her. "You've got guts, kid," he said, his tone grudgingly respectful. "I'm not saying I like it, but maybe that cat isn't such a bad thing after all." Sophia smiled, knowing she had won a small but important victory. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfect again. The event had been a resounding success, and Marmalade's future seemed secure. The rescue organization helped set up an official sponsorship for his care, and the neighbors were more united than ever. Even Mr. Becker, though still grumpy, hadn't caused any further trouble. Sophia visited Marmalade in the lot each day, but her visits felt different now. Instead of just her and Marmalade, other neighbors began to stop by. Some brought treats or sat for a while, petting the scruffy orange cat and chatting with Sophia. Marmalade basked in the attention, his green eyes brighter and his purr louder than ever. But just as Sophia was starting to feel like all the hard work had paid off, the final complication struck. One cloudy afternoon, Sophia arrived at the lot to find Marmalade missing. His shelter was empty, his food bowl untouched. Panic set in immediately. She searched the lot, calling his name and shaking the bag of treats she always carried. "Marmalade! Marmalade, where are you?" Her voice echoed, but there was no answer. Sophia ran to the elderly woman's house across the street. "Have you seen Marmalade?" she asked, breathless and desperate. The woman shook her head, her face full of concern. "I saw him this morning, but not since then. Maybe he wandered off." Sophia's chest tightened. Marmalade rarely left the lot, especially during the day. Something was wrong. As the hours passed, Sophia's worry grew into dread. She alerted the neighbors, and soon a small search party was combing the streets, calling Marmalade's name. But as night fell, there was still no sign of him. At home, Sophia sat at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy from crying. Her parents tried to comfort her, but nothing they said could ease the ache in her chest. Marmalade had been her responsibility, and now he was gone. The next morning, just as Sophia was preparing to search again, a knock came at the door. It was the man in the work uniform who had helped build Marmalade's shelter. He looked grim. "I think I found him," he said. Sophia's heart leapt, but the man's expression told her this wasn't good news. He led her to a small alley a few blocks away, where Marmalade was curled up on the ground, looking frail and injured. Tears streamed down Sophia's face as she knelt beside him. "Marmalade," she whispered, stroking his fur gently. His green eyes fluttered open, and he let out a weak meow. "We need to get him help," the man said firmly. Without hesitation, Sophia's dad carried Marmalade to the car, and they drove to the rescue organization that had helped with the event. The vet there examined him carefully, explaining that he had likely been attacked by another animal and was dehydrated and exhausted. "He's a tough little guy," the vet said, offering Sophia a small smile. "But he'll need rest and care for a while." Relief washed over Sophia, but so did determination. She realized that Marmalade's safety couldn't rely on luck or makeshift solutions anymore. He needed a permanent home, one where he'd be safe from harm. That evening, as Marmalade rested at the rescue center, Sophia made the hardest decision of her young life. She sat with her parents, her voice trembling but firm. I think Marmalade needs to be adopted," she said. Her mom's eyes softened. "Sweetheart, are you sure? You've worked so hard for him." Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I love him too much to let him get hurt again. He needs a real home, not just a lot." Her parents exchanged a look, then her dad smiled. "Well, let's find him the best home we can." The next morning, Sophia returned to the rescue center, her heart heavy but resolute. Marmalade looked better already. His fur had been cleaned, and he purred softly when Sophia sat beside him. She scratched behind his ears, whispering, "I'm going to find the best home for you. I promise." With the help of the rescue staff, Sophia and her parents began spreading the word. Flyers were printed and handed out around the neighborhood. The story of Marmalade and Sophia's determination had already touched many hearts, and soon the offers started pouring in. But Sophia didn't say yes to just anyone. She wanted Marmalade to go to a home where he would be loved and protected, a place where he'd never feel abandoned again. She interviewed potential adopters with the seriousness of someone far beyond her 8 years. "Do you have other pets?" she asked one couple. "Do you have a safe yard for him to play in?" she asked another. While some were amused by her thoroughness, others admired her commitment. It wasn't long before Sophia found a perfect match, a kind woman named Clara who had a warm smile and a cozy house filled with sunlight. Clara had recently lost her elderly cat and was looking for a new companion. "He'll have his own bed by the window," Clara said, showing Sophia a picture of the sunny nook, "and plenty of space to roam in my garden. I promise to take care of him like he's my own family." Sophia knew in her heart that Clara was the one. On the day Marmalade left the rescue center, Sophia felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. She hugged him tightly, her tears wetting his soft fur. "Be happy, okay?" she whispered. "You'll always be my best friend." Clara gently placed Marmalade in a carrier and gave Sophia a warm hug. "You've done something amazing," she said. "You saved him, and now he's going to have the life he deserves." The neighborhood wasn't quite the same without Marmalade in the lot, but Sophia's story left a lasting legacy. Inspired by her actions, the community came together to set up a small fund for other stray animals in need. The lot became a place of compassion, with neighbors keeping an eye out for any other creatures that might need help. As for Sophia, she continued to visit Marmalade at Clara's house whenever she could. Seeing him healthy, happy, and loved made her heart soar. She realized that letting him go wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. And every time Sophia walked by the lot, she smiled, knowing she'd made a difference, not just for Marmalade, but for everyone around her.